Xu is an avid political activist and writer featured in The Federalist and The Daily Signal. In 2016, he co-founded the Young Americans for Freedom chapter at Davidson. Xu now works as a development officer at Young America's Foundation, and he continues to write about topics like race, identity, and culture. And now we're going to hand it over to Michelle. She's going to ask you some questions.
Great.
Yeah, hi, I'm Michelle. So for the first question, can you just tell us a little bit more about your background?
So my mom and dad, they're immigrants from China and those kinds of things, but they were never really, my dad was less traditional, I think, than some people. He was very entrepreneurial. He started his own business, and I think he taught me kind of entrepreneurial values. I always grew up kind of a contrarian. And, you know, when I went to high school, like some of you guys are in, I was always the contrarian. I would always argue back with people. You know, all of my friends were liberal. And when I was in high school, I started the local prayer group, where I'm a pretty strong Christian, just still growing in my faith, but that impacted me and my values a lot, taught me to care about equality of all people, and taught me to realize that, you know, if we really care about the equality of all people, right, we can't just try to play God, right, and try to ensure that everybody has the equal outcome, you know, or has the same outcome of themselves, because all that really does, if it works as it's supposed, it just makes us richer, you know, it puts us in positions of power, and we think that we are good enough to sculpt the rest of society according to our, you know, ideas. And that's just not, that's just unfair, and that doesn't come with the American system. And at worst, you know, it breaks down and becomes, you know, societies like Venezuela, societies, you know, like France during the French Revolution. And so I studied those things, and I thought about those things, and I started writing about those topics, especially with regards to race. And now I'm a race and identity politics writer, as well as, you know, very, very involved in the conservative movement.
Yeah, you mentioned you're a Christian. So do you have any like unique experiences you have being like an Asian American and a Christian?
Well, I went to a Chinese church. I went to a Chinese Christian church when I was in Princeton, New Jersey, called Princeton Christian Church. And I also went to a predominantly white church, a white Baptist Christian church. And I have to say, you know, the way that I grew up, when I was in the white Baptist church, I was like the only Asian there, but I still made friends. I still had fun. And, you know, I knew some people and those kinds of things. I was always pretty immersed, I think, in white evangelical Christian culture, and just to know things from that kind of perspective. So I would say, you know, I was a mix. But I would say people don't necessarily think of me as like the traditional kind of Asian kid, or even the Asian Christian kid, because I have such a Baptist background. And I think that it's a little bit different when you're in those kinds of churches. The things that you learn, the Christian teaching you learn is the same, but the style is a little bit different. I think that when you go to a predominantly Caucasian Baptist church, you know, people are going to be preaching, you know, and they want you to preach, and they want you to get up and preach. And they want you to start things and do these kinds of things. And, you know, there are some things that I didn't like about it, but that's the kind of background that I got. So that's kind of the tradition that taught me how to speak up for myself, I would say.
So you were saying like how Baptists, they're always like, you should speak up about something. So like what inspired you to like write about current issues? Like, do you have any particular inspirations you had? Or
It started, I think, in the Harvard discrimination lawsuit, right? You guys all familiar with the
When was that? When was that? That was like your junior year in Davidson, right?
Yeah, it was my junior year at Davidson. That's when I first started writing politically, I would say, for national outlets, because I was a speaker at the rally against Harvard's discrimination policy. And what I thought when I first encountered this issue, I always knew in my head, you know, look, every Asian mother, Chinese mother, or whatever, wants their kid to get into Harvard or whatever. It's like the first word that you learn when you come into this country is Disney World. The second is Harvard. So, you know, and it's a brand, you know, it's a brand. Does it deserve to be considered the best college in the world? I would debate that. I
It's the
honestly would debate
Coca-Cola of
that.
Harvard's.
Right. It's the richest college in the world and maybe provides you some nice networking opportunities and those kind of things. But with regards to teaching, you know, there are many great schools in America that are just as competitive in that as possible. And I think what you're going to see, I think with this new COVID thing, is you're going to see Harvard lose a lot of its value because students can't be on campus together. Um, because that's where you meet, you know, the children of senators and the children of this and that and whatever.
The daughter of Xi Jinping.
Right, the daughter of Xi Jinping or whatever. If you ever want a CCP job, you know, hit her up. You know, I so I started speaking out because Harvard really thinks they're all that. Like they literally think like not only are we the best college in the world, but like we get to sculpt society the way we want because we want to produce citizen leaders. So because they say they want to produce citizen leaders, that justifies them to say, oh, we want our student body to look like the rest of the world. I mean, it's a very top-down approach, and you see it in their thinking, not just with affirmative action, not just with their anti-Asian sentiment, not just with this idea that there are too many Asians, but in just the very arrogance that they come around. So I found a heart there, and I wanted to speak out about it.
Like the Harvard discrimination lawsuit is like related to affirmative action policies, right? And it's something like Asian Americans, Asians like they struggle with, right? Like in current society. Besides like affirmative action, what other like problems do you see like Asian Americans facing today?
Well, it's the Harvard discrimination lawsuit. It's funny because it's not even just about affirmative action. It's not. It should the purported basis is about affirmative action, but really, I mean, the deeper issue, is, you know, what gives you the right? What gives a person the right to judge someone on the color of their skin? Right? I mean, we work so hard in this country we work so hard and suffered through civil war, through slavery, through Jim Crow, you know, Chinese exclusion, Japanese internment, this, you know, racist epidemics in our country, just to get to this point where we're finally in 1965, we said we're going to eliminate all legal constraints on race and judgment. And now some elite institution wants to come and bring it back. What gives them the right to say that? I mean, millions of people died, so we have the right to be treated on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And you, Harvard University, really think that you want to bring it back so that you can have a couple more rich Black people in your classes instead of some Asian kids? I mean, that's what it's about. You know, it's about kind of the arrogance of elite society and saying that we want to dictate and we want to judge based on these old racial prejudices instead of the way that our country is moving and should be moving.
Yeah, so higher education would obviously be a pretty important topic for the Asian American community, as shown by this like Harvard lawsuit. What's your opinion on the state of American college campuses?
So America has the best higher education system in the world. There's no this is something I think a lot of people miss because we always focus on Harvard and stuff, but actually, like, just in terms of research output, America leads the world in research output. In terms of the opportunities for kids to go to colleges, the diversity of colleges in this country, and we have liberal arts schools, we have state schools, we have schools that are government funded, we have schools that are privately funded. People can really, if you have like even, you know, basic intellect in this country, you can even go to like community college, or by the way, you can go to trade school. Trade school is a great thing.
David Hogg made it into Harvard.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's, you know, David Hogg isn't exactly, you know, Albert Einstein, put it that way. I think if we need to understand that we're very blessed by our higher education system here, because you look at countries like China and you look at countries like India, where it's like if you don't get into some of those elite universities, your future is like significantly deprived because you don't. But in America, it's not really the same, because if you don't get into one of these elite universities, if you don't get into like the top 5 tier universities, you have plenty of opportunities still waiting ahead of you, because all the other universities that are really scattered over there all have great networks and are working really hard. So I consider this whole, I understand that we are privileged to live in this country. I think we have to understand and recognize that we are privileged, but we're not privileged because of our skin color necessarily. We're privileged because we live in this country that has all these great opportunities, and we need to pursue our ideals from that gratitude.
Just to follow up on that question, what about the state? I think Oliver wanted to talk about the state of college campuses, specifically the individuals on the college campuses who have created this atmosphere that's very one-dimensional and very elitist and very very liberal. Okay.
Well, let's put it this way: the diversity industry in this country is a 3 billion plus industry. In fact, that number that I got was from 2003. I could see that number probably being 5-10 times the number that it was before. So I would say
definitely.
to 30 billion. The diversity industry is a 15 to 30 billion industry. We're talking people's careers require, their adherence to this ideology. So if you look at the people who are really advocating for racial preferences, or if you look at the people who are really advocating for a worldview shaped on white privilege and Black oppression, and Asian, I don't know, somewhere in the middle, they actually probably think Asian people are even more privileged than white people, even though Asians have experienced historical discrimination in the United States, so it's just a ridiculous claim. But the people who really advocate this most zealously are people who build their careers out of it. The head of UC Berkeley's Chief Diversity Officer, and they have a title called Chief Diversity Officer. In fact, they have like 40 people strictly devoted to diversity. But the chief ed at UC Berkeley makes $385,000 a year. Then you have people like Robin DiAngelo, who writes White Fragility. She's a corporate diversity trainer. Her job is to tell big corporations, hey, here's how you can signal your virtue. Hire a couple more Black people or Hispanic people into your boardroom, put them in and stuff like that. Show hey, we're diverse and stuff like that. So the left will get off you and get off your back for a little while, and they'll go and eat someone else for the time being. And that's basically what this diversity culture has become. It's become a way to avoid, I think, actual responsibility for actually, training up low-income, underprivileged minority people. And it's become a way to avoid that by signaling your virtue.
Could you just tell us a little bit about what your biggest political influence has been?
My biggest political influence? I would say a couple people. I would say C.S. Lewis. You wouldn't think, oh, he's a political influence, but he actually wrote a fair number of political works. He should, but really just his idea of, he advocated so passionately for a free society, I think, and for, a society where freedom is protected. And so those are my influences. Ronald Reagan is another huge influence of mine. I work for Young America's Foundation, as Harrison said. We preserve Ronald Reagan's ranch, Rancho del Cielo. That's the ranch that he retired to, during his presidency. That's the ranch where, he took Mikhail Gorbachev to, and he loved America. I love America because I see what it stands for. I don't love America because of a certain color or a certain composition, but of the ideals that it stands for. The idea of equality of opportunity, the idea of meritocracy, the idea that hard work pays off. And I want to restore America to those ideals. And people like Ronald Reagan, C.S. Lewis, they paved the way for me. But I see a country that we're drifting off because of this, because the elites in our society are so ungrateful for the things that built up this country that they want to change it and bring it all back to the 1800s again.
And so I think a big issue today with politics is cancel culture. So what impact do you think cancel culture has had on it?
Also, Kenny, have you ever been canceled yourself at Davidson?
People have tried to cancel me. When I was at Davidson College, I ran the Young Americans for Freedom chapter. And I remember I was running for SGA Senate, And on the day of the election, I went around campaigning and said, hey, I'm for this, those kinds of things. I made sure to do all those things. And on the day of the election, a guy named Nicholas Trevino basically wrote this long, scary post on the Davidson College Facebook page where he was like, don't vote for Kenny because he says this thing, out of context, misstatements, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, wow, that was my first encounter with like people who, really don't like what I stand for, because I never met this guy. I never hurt him. I never talked to him in person. There was no way I could have hurt him. But he felt the need to really go and attack me for what I believe.
And he put this on the college's Facebook page?
Yeah, on the college's, we had like this Davidson group where like 2,000 people would come and post Facebook stuff and whatnot. But he thought that could shut me up, but it didn't. But by the way, in terms of your question about cancel culture, though, like, it's an intimidation tactic, right? I wrote an article about this in the Federalist. Actually, it's my most recent article called "To Stop People from Canceling, Thinkers. Do what J.K. Rowling did." So J.K. Rowling, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this story. Do you guys know kind of recent events with J.K. Rowling? Yeah, so she basically has stood up for the biological definition of man and woman. And, she's not even a conservative, but she picks an issue and she said, this is an issue that I'm really passionate about and I'm not going to budge on it. And she's going to defend herself. And the left came, they attacked, and they roared, and all the Harry Potter fans started crying their tears out and whatever, and, stuff like that. But
I mean, she took a really big risk, right? The Harry Potter fandom is probably the most left fandom I've ever seen.
Exactly. But she made such an impact because a senator, literally a senator, because there was this bill called the Equality Act that was being passed around by House Democrats that said, oh, we're going to allow anybody to, change their gender or sex, their gender to anything that they want. And, somebody cited her testimony. A senator cited her testimony, and that was an influence in leading to the defeat of that bill. So we, I think, as people, as citizens, it's not just our right, but it's our responsibility to pick something and stand by it, learn all you can about it, and then just go out and defend it. I think that's what we have to do if we're going to make an impact in this country. And what I learned from my time at Davidson is that if you really stand by your beliefs, you can make a change, and you will make a change, because I was able to win people to my cause. We had a club that started out with 5 people. I brought in speaker after speaker. Babe Buchanan, she talked about political correctness and free speech. I grew my chapter to over 50 people, and I brought over 200 people to come to my speaker events. So that I was able to influence the culture, but you have to stick by it, and it's hard.
Clearly, there are plenty of problems with the current political situation, but with current issues, Kenneth, what do you think the Asian American community should do to best further ourselves and our country?
Part of the issue is that non-Asians, maybe moderate people, would look upon some of the Asian Americans fighting college discrimination. They would say, oh, they just want to get seats at Harvard, or they just want like a few spots at Harvard. Who cares? Whatever. But this is why you have to link the debate to larger American ideals, right? You have to be like, do you want to cede to an elite university the right to judge people on things that you can't control? Like, that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Do you want to cede to an elite institution, an institution that claims to be the gatekeeper of leaders, the ability to judge them on their race? Does that comport with American ideals of the 14th Amendment? Does that comport with the Civil Rights Act? Does that comport with all of the ideas and the dreams that we've had of immigrants and Americans worldwide that said, I'm going to be judged by my hard work rather than my background? So yeah, we do have to speak up. Asian Americans have to speak up, but we have to link ourselves to the larger American ideal and experience. There's one thing I wanted to point you to, which is Andrew Yang, which is kind of weird because he's a Democrat. I don't want to like say that I support him. In fact, I think his UBI proposal is kind of hilarious. But but he did run an article in the Washington Post that he got a lot of criticism for back in February, where he said Asian Americans really do have to, have a responsibility to show America, that we are strongly embedded in American ideals, that we're not just foreigners, that we're not just aliens, but we're Americans who understand the rights and responsibilities of our citizenship. And that got a lot of criticism from the left because they're like, oh, but all of this racism and whatever, and America sucks, and why would we ever want to talk about America in that way? Well, leave that to the left. You got some criticism for it, but it was the right thing to say.
I see. So currently, with the protests going on and racial issues being at the forefront of American politics, what do you think is America's biggest and most important racial issue, and how do you think we can solve it?
I think the most important racial issue right now is the dichotomization of race. It is, increasingly speaking, race is becoming more prevalent in American life, but it's also becoming more dichotomous. It's becoming more black and white. And increasingly, like people like us, the left is not asking us, kind of forcing us to choose sides under their narrative. They're like, are you going to stand with the privileged white people, who are oppressed our country, or are you going to stand with social justice? But the thing is, Asians really don't fit into either category. Both on their background and their cultural expressions, they just don't fit. And so it's an evil narrative because it reduces people into groups of privilege and oppression. And if you're the victim group, how is playing a victim going to help you find opportunities in the society? I mean, how is it? If you believe that you're a victim, guess what? Your prophecy will come true. So I think that is the big issue in our society. It's like the victimization, the link between race and victimization and oppression and privilege is coming back, and it's going to cloud the minds of a lot of people.
So where do you think Asian Americans stand on this dichotomy? Is it a spectrum or is it actually a dichotomy?
I think Asian Americans need to reject this dichotomy. I honestly, I think about this all the time. Like I think about it like, are Asian Americans privileged or Asian Americans oppressed? But the truth is, the Asian Americans are the paradox because they come from discriminated backgrounds and they've experienced historical discrimination in American society, often severe. I mean, look, Japanese Americans were the only ethnic group in America ever to have an internment camp against them, right? Chinese Americans were the only ethnicity in America ever to have a formal exclusion act against them, to say nobody from China. They're the only one, no other immigrant group. So you tell me, oh no, Chinese haven't experienced enough discrimination in this country. That's just not true. That's just not true. There has been a legacy of discrimination against the Chinese, and yet Asian Americans continue to, have higher incomes than whites, achieve on a greater level of educational success. In many cases, they have a long way to go because Asian Americans have not yet been able to break into the American elite. But at the very least, they've proven that you cannot just extrapolate someone's background and say that it determines their future. And that's what the left is doing right now. They're extrapolating your background and they're determining your future through that.
So to add on to that, and a bit of a reversal, clearly racial issues are a big problem, but what do you think makes America great, at least relative to other countries?
I think the fact that America was not founded on the basis of a land or territorial claim or an ethnicity claim, but was founded on the basis of a set of principles, political ideals. I think that is one of the big things. Countries like Poland, Russia, Great Britain, maybe less Great Britain, but countries like China, countries like even countries like India and stuff like that. They're very. It's a very. Their founding and their legacy today is very ethnically based. And I'm not saying that that makes them worse, but I'm saying that that's something that's hard to shake. America was founded differently. You know, there's America was founded off the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and people who rebelled against their home country and then drew all of these immigrants in from a whole bunch of different countries and integrated their land. And yeah, had a lot of slaves too. But slaves are part of the American founding too. Um, and all of this, kind of comes together. And I think that that is what, and we struggle to uphold the principles that we propagate, but at least we're founded on those principles.
What makes the American Revolution different from, let's say, the French Revolution or something like that?
Because the French Revolution, one, it was an elite revolution, right? I mean, there were people who clearly used and exploited the French Revolution for personal gain. I mean, we're talking about Robespierre, we're talking about, the New Order, the French Revolution. But the American Revolution was genuinely a revolution of the citizenry. I mean, it was an entirely state by statewide revolution. There were colonists who rejected that, going around. So it was a full-scale revolution based off of ideals, and based off of certain political ideals, rather than kind of an elite-sponsored revolution that was based on kind of simply flipping the classes. Because that's what the French Revolution was about. It was like there was this high class. They wanted to move to the low class and bring the low class up to the high class. But what actually happened in the French Revolution was the high class lost their high class, but the low class didn't get up to the high class. There just became a new high class, which was the people the elites that instigated the revolution that became the new high class, and then the low class just became as oppressed as ever. So that was not a revolution of ideals, that was a revolution of elites.
I see. So I guess you could even compare it to stuff that's happening today, that what's going on recently and how many people who, like you talked about earlier, who want to, cause change and maybe help minorities are just looking for some sort of power themselves. But finally, do you have any last words you'd like to?
Go
Excuse
ahead.
me?
And their careers. I told you about the officer's salary, right? Anyway, go ahead.
Do you have any last words you'd like to say to the Asian American community?
Now is not the time to be silent. If you think that this thing is going to stop and just fade away, you're wrong. Because this ideology has been incubating in colleges and universities for 50 years. Okay? I mean, William F. Buckley wrote about this in 1957, or whenever he wrote.
Who is William F. Buckley? I don't think everyone here knows him.
William F. Buckley is kind of the founder of modern conservatism, I would say, one of the founders. He was the lead publisher of National Review, he was the founder of National Review. He was a great influence on Young Americans for Freedom, and he greatly influenced Ronald Reagan. He was a public intellectual, one of the last lions, so to speak. So anyway, he wrote about it. He wrote about the kind of Marxist narrative taking over Yale in his place, and what happened was, the people flocked into these elite universities, and then obviously all of the second tier and third tier universities, they all want to copy the elite universities. So they hired people of those persuasions of their own, and then that spreads out and then takes over the entire college and university campus. And now what you see is you see the fruits of that. All of these people growing in with this identity politics training, this training of, America is this irredeemably racist country, this training of white people are at the top and black people are at the bottom, this training of, Asian Americans are just proximity to whites, they're just white people. But I was actually called that in college, which is a hilarious story, but I won't talk about it. But this whole thing is spread, it's metastasized, and and if you think that you can just wait this out, it's not true. You can't just wait this out, because this has been 50 years in the making, and it's going to wreak its havoc for 50 years. It's what the Bible says, you reap what you sow. So if you sow something for 50 years, you're going to get 50 years of harvest. And that's what's going to happen. You're going to get, without somebody really coming in and fighting back and trying to make a change, you're going to get 50 years of this ideology. And when you do, what are the consequences of that on our country? They're going to be greatly severe.
Well, thank you, Kenny, for giving your thoughts. And we don't want to keep you that too long, so I think this is going to be the end of our little interview. Obviously, I'm very thankful that you could join us. I'm thankful that you could come here and give me your little spiel. Awesome. I'm going to end this call.
Right.
See you later.
Bring it my way. All right. See you later. Okay. Bye.